The message arrived on a Tuesday morning while Dr. Alex Reed was grading papers about ancient warfare tactics. The holographic seal that appeared above the communication device made Alex nearly drop the coffee mug. 12 interlocking symbols, rotated slowly in the air, each one representing a different alien civilization that most humans had only heard about in whispered rumors. Alex had spent 15 years studying how different species approached conflict and cooperation. Most of that time was spent analyzing second-hand data and translated documents. Direct contact with the major galactic powers was rare for humans. Earth had only achieved faster-than-light travel 3 years ago, making humanity the newest and least influential member of the galactic community. The message was brief and formal. The Galactic Simulation Council requested Dr. Alex Reed's presence as an observer for their upcoming resolution of the Kepler dispute. Transportation would be provided. Attendance was voluntary but highly recommended for scientific advancement. Alex, read the message 3 times before understanding what it meant. The Kepler dispute involved 2 powerful civilizations fighting over mining rights to an entire star system. The Titans were an aquatic species known for their advanced engineering and peaceful nature. The Quartzlings were crystalline beings, whose technology was based on harmonic resonance and light manipulation. Both species had legitimate claims to the Kepler system, and tensions had been building for decades. But instead of going to war, they would settle their dispute in something called a strategic reality simulation. Alex had heard rumors about these simulations but never understood what they actually were. The few human diplomats who had witnessed them described them as incredibly advanced war games that somehow produced binding results for real-world conflicts. 3 days later, Alex found themselves aboard a transport ship heading toward Omega-7, a massive neutral station floating in deep space. The ship was automated, with no crew visible during the journey. Alex spent the time reviewing everything they could find about the 2 civilizations involved in the dispute. The Titans had evolved on an ocean world where cooperation was essential for survival. Their military doctrine emphasized defensive strategies and resource conservation. They preferred to win through endurance rather than overwhelming force. The Quartzlings came from a world of crystal formations and underground caverns. They fought using coordinated light patterns and sonic weapons that could shatter most known materials. Omega-7 appeared on the view screen like a small moon made of metal and glass. The station was enormous, with multiple sections rotating at different speeds. Docking bays large enough to hold entire fleets dotted its surface. Alex could see ships from dozens of different species parked around the station. The interior of Omega-7 was even more impressive than its exterior. Wide corridors stretched in all directions, with moving walkways carrying beings of every imaginable shape and size. Alex recognized some species from textbooks, but saw many others that were completely unknown. The air was carefully regulated to support multiple types of life, though Alex noticed several areas sealed off with different atmospheric conditions. A guide met Alex at the docking area. The being looked humanoid, but had silver skin that reflected light in patterns that seemed to communicate mood or intent. It introduced itself as Observer Kelvin and explained that it worked for the Council as a neutral party to help new species understand the simulation process. They walked through the station toward the central hub where the simulation chambers were located. Kelvin explained that the simulations were more than just computer programs or virtual reality. They used advanced technology to create complete alternate realities where entire military campaigns could be fought without any physical consequences. The results of these simulated wars were then used to determine real-world outcomes. Alex asked why civilizations would agree to let a simulation decide their fate instead of fighting real wars. Kelvin paused before answering, as if choosing words carefully. He explained that real wars were expensive and destructive, often lasting for generations and consuming vast resources. The simulations allowed conflicts to be resolved quickly and cleanly, with the losing side accepting predetermined consequences rather than facing complete destruction. The simulation chamber was unlike anything Alex had ever seen. It was a vast, spherical room with no visible walls or ceiling. Floating platforms provided observation points for different species, each one designed to accommodate specific biological needs. The Titan observers floated in tanks of specialized water, while the Quartzling representatives sat on platforms that hummed with harmonic frequencies. Alex was assigned to a small platform designed for human physiology. It had basic life support and a communication interface that could translate between the hundreds of languages being spoken in the chamber. From this vantage point, Alex could see the central area where the simulation would take place. The simulation itself appeared as a three-dimensional space showing the Kepler star system in perfect detail. Every planet, asteroid, and space station was visible, along with the military forces of both civilizations. The level of detail was incredible. Alex could zoom in to see individual soldiers and their equipment, or pull back to view entire fleet formations. Overseer Thandros, a tall being with features that seemed to shift between different species, announced the beginning of the simulation. The rules were simple. Both sides would fight using their actual military doctrines and available resources. The simulation would compress months of potential warfare into just a few days of real time. Whatever happened in the simulation would determine the final disposition of the Kepler system. As the simulation began, Alex watched the Titan and Quartzling fleets move into position. The Titans spread their forces across multiple defensive positions, while the Quartzlings concentrated their ships for coordinated strikes. It was exactly what Alex would have expected based on their research into both species' military traditions. But something felt wrong. Alex had studied enough human military history to recognize patterns, and the Titan deployment looked like it had a critical weakness. Their defensive positions were too spread out to provide mutual support, and the Quartzlings seemed to be positioning themselves to exploit that exact vulnerability. Alex tried to dismiss the feeling as overthinking the situation. After all, these were advanced civilizations with thousands of years of military experience. Surely they understood their own tactics better than a human observer who had been studying them for only a few days. Yet, as the first day of the simulation progressed, Alex became more convinced that the Titans were making a mistake that would cost them everything. The question was whether a mere observer was supposed to do anything about it, or if interference was even possible in these advanced simulations. Alex spent the entire night studying the tactical situation unfolding in the simulation. While other observers rested in their assigned quarters, Alex remained on the platform, watching the slow movements of fleets and analyzing defensive positions. The more Alex studied the Titan strategy, the more obvious the fatal flaw became. The Titans had positioned their main defensive fleet in a standard protective formation around 3 key planets in the Kepler system. It was a textbook defensive strategy that would work well against most enemies, but the Quartzlings were not most enemies. Their light-based weapons could be focused through natural crystal formations found throughout the system, creating devastating concentrated attacks from unexpected angles. What made it worse was that the Quartzlings were clearly aware of this advantage. Their fleet movement suggested they were planning to use the crystal asteroids as amplification points for a coordinated strike that would overwhelm the Titan defenses. The Titans seemed completely unaware of the trap being set around them. Alex tried to convince themselves that the Titan commanders must have some plan they could not see. These were experienced military leaders who had fought dozens of campaigns. They would not make such an obvious mistake. But as the second day of simulation began, the Quartzling forces continued their methodical positioning while the Titans maintained their vulnerable deployment. By midday, Alex could not stand watching anymore. The communication interface on the observation platform was designed to translate between species, but it was only supposed to work for observers to communicate with each other. Alex began experimenting with the system, trying to understand how it connected to the simulation itself. The interface was more complex than it appeared. Alex discovered that it did not just translate languages, but also converted different types of communication methods. The Titans used a combination of sonic patterns and chemical signals, while the Quartzlings communicated through light frequencies and harmonic vibrations. Somehow, the system could interpret and translate all of these into something any species could understand. After several hours of careful experimentation, Alex found a way to access the simulation's communication network. It was not supposed to be possible for observers to make contact with the participants, but the human approach to technology often involved finding uses that the original designers never intended. Alex's first attempt to contact the Titan fleet failed completely. The message was blocked by security protocols designed to prevent outside interference. But Alex was persistent, and eventually found a way to make the communication appear as if it was coming from within the Titan command. Structure itself. Admiral Narration was reviewing defensive positions when the message arrived. At first, he assumed it was from one of his tactical advisors. The message was brief and direct, warning that the Quartzling fleet was positioning itself to use the crystal formations as weapon amplifiers. Narration almost dismissed the warning, but something about the message made him pause. The communication pattern was unlike anything in standard Titan military protocol. It contained references to tactical concepts that were not part of their traditional training. Narration had never heard of terms like flanking maneuvers or diversionary tactics, but somehow the concepts made perfect sense when explained properly. Alex watched through the simulation interface as Admiral Narration began repositioning his fleets. The changes were small at first, just minor adjustments to patrol routes and defensive positions. But these small changes began to disrupt the Quartzling battle plan in ways that neither side had anticipated. The Quartzlings had spent days positioning their forces for a coordinated strike that depended on the Titans maintaining their predictable defensive posture. When the Titan fleets began moving in unexpected patterns, the carefully planned attack became much more difficult to execute. Alex continued to provide tactical advice, drawing on thousands of years of human military history. The Titans learned about concepts like feints and misdirection, using small groups of ships to make the enemy think the main fleet was in a different location. They began using asteroid fields not just as cover, but as platforms for surprise attacks. The simulation, which was supposed to conclude with a decisive Quartzling victory within 72 hours, began to extend beyond its predicted time frame. The Council's advanced algorithms had calculated every possible outcome based on known tactical doctrines and historical precedents. But Alex was introducing variables that had never been part of their calculations. Observer Kelvin approached Alex's platform on the third day, looking concerned. The silver patterns on his skin were shifting rapidly, suggesting anxiety or confusion. He explained that the simulation was behaving in ways that the Council had never seen before. New tactical patterns were emerging that did not match either species-known military traditions. Alex played innocent, suggesting that perhaps the Titans were more creative than anyone had expected. Kelvin seemed doubtful, but had no evidence that anything improper was happening. The Council's monitoring systems showed no signs of external interference or system malfunction. Meanwhile, the tactical situation in the simulation continued to evolve in unexpected directions. The Titans began using guerrilla tactics, with small groups of ships conducting hit-and-run attacks before disappearing into asteroid fields or nebula clouds. They started using psychological warfare, transmitting false information to make the Quartzlings think their forces were stronger or weaker than they actually were. Admiral Narration was fascinated by these new approaches to combat. His species had always focused on direct confrontation and honorable engagement. The idea of using deception and misdirection had never occurred to them, but it proved remarkably effective against an enemy that expected predictable behavior. The Quartzlings began to adapt as well, developing counter-strategies to deal with the Titans' new tactics. But each time they adjusted their approach, Alex would help the Titans develop new methods to stay ahead. It became a constant cycle of adaptation and counter-adaptation that the simulation's algorithms could not predict or control. By the end of the fourth day, the Council was holding emergency meetings to discuss the unprecedented situation. Never before had a simulation extended beyond its calculated parameters. The carefully balanced conflict had become a true military contest with no predetermined outcome. Alex realized that they had stumbled onto something much larger than a simple tactical intervention. The simulation was not just a game or a training exercise. There was something real at stake, something that made Admiral Narion's communications carry genuine emotion and desperation. The Titan commander was not just playing a role in an elaborate war game. He was fighting for something that truly mattered. As Alex prepared for the fifth day of what should have been a 3-day simulation, they began to suspect that they had uncovered a secret that the Galactic Simulation Council had been hiding from the galaxy for a very long time. The truth came in fragments, like pieces of a puzzle that Alex had to assemble from intercepted communications and careful observation. On the fifth day of the simulation, while monitoring Titan fleet movements, Alex detected something that should not have been possible in a virtual environment. One of the Titan ships had suffered damage during a skirmish with Quartzling forces. Alex watched as repair crews worked frantically to fix the vessel's engines. But the emotional intensity of their communications was too real, too desperate for people who knew they were in a simulation where death carried no permanent consequences. Alex began monitoring communications more carefully, using the translation interface to eavesdrop on private conversations between Titan crew members. What they heard changed everything. The sailors were talking about their families back home, about what would happen to their children if they failed in this mission. They expressed genuine fear about the consequences of defeat, not just for themselves, but for their entire civilization. A terrible suspicion began to form in Alex's mind. These were not simulated beings following programmed responses. These were real people, somehow uploaded into the virtual environment where their consciousness could fight and die without affecting their physical bodies. But if they were real, then what exactly were the stakes of this simulation? Alex spent hours researching the history of the Galactic Simulation Council, digging through databases and archived records that were accessible to observers. Most of the information was routine procedural documents and technical specifications. But buried in the archives were references to something called the Consequence Protocol that was never fully explained. The breakthrough came when Alex discovered a sealed communication log from a previous simulation between two species called the Vortak and the Zentari. The log was corrupted and mostly unreadable, but a few fragments remained intact. The Zentari had lost their simulation, and the consequences were far more severe than simple territorial concessions. The Zentari homeworld had been placed under economic embargo. Their trade routes were restricted. Their colonies were forced to pay tribute to the Vortak. Entire populations had been relocated to less habitable worlds. The bloodless resolution of their conflict had resulted in the systematic oppression of their entire species. Alex realized that the simulations were not just advanced war games used to determine fair outcomes. They were tools of control, allowing the Council to decide which civilizations would thrive and which would be subjugated, all while maintaining the fiction that the results were determined through fair competition rather than political manipulation. The evidence was overwhelming. Once Alex knew what to look for, every major conflict between galactic civilizations in the past 1,000 years had been resolved through simulation rather than actual warfare. The outcomes always seemed to favor civilizations that were already part of the Council's inner circle, while newer or less influential species consistently found themselves on the losing side. Alex's discovery was interrupted by an urgent communication from Admiral Narion. The Titan commander had detected unusual energy readings around the Quartzling fleet that suggested they were preparing for a final, decisive assault. The admiral's voice carried genuine panic as he described the scale of the attack being planned. For a moment, Alex considered staying silent. This was not humanity's fight, and getting involved could have serious consequences for Earth's relationship with the galactic community. But watching real people face destruction while believing they were participating in a fair contest was something Alex could not tolerate. Instead of just providing tactical advice, Alex began actively sabotaging the simulation's parameters, using knowledge of human computer systems and creative approaches to problem-solving. Alex found ways to introduce chaos elements that neither side could predict or control. False sensor readings began appearing throughout the simulation, making it impossible for either side to know the true positions of enemy forces. Communication systems started experiencing random failures that forced both fleets to rely on backup protocols they had never tested in combat. Equipment began malfunctioning in ways that required creative solutions rather than standard repair. Procedures. The Quartzlings, who had spent generations perfecting their coordinated light-based attacks, found their carefully synchronized formations disrupted by phantom signals and false targeting data. Their harmonic weapons, which depended on precise frequency matching, began producing random interference patterns that made accurate fire nearly impossible. The Titans, meanwhile, learned to adapt to the chaos by using human-inspired tactics that relied on individual initiative rather than centralized command. Small groups of ships began operating independently, making decisions based on local conditions rather than following predetermined battle plans. Alex introduced concepts from human military history that neither species had ever encountered. The Titans learned about asymmetric warfare, using their smaller, more maneuverable ships to attack supply lines and communication relays rather than engaging in direct fleet battles. They began using false flag operations, disguising their ships as civilian vessels or even as enemy craft to get close to Quartzling positions. The psychological aspect of warfare became just as important as the physical conflict. Alex helped the Titans develop propaganda techniques to demoralize enemy forces and boost their own morale. They learned to use captured Quartzling communication frequencies to spread false information and create confusion within enemy ranks. As the simulation entered its second week, far beyond any previous recorded duration, the Council began taking more drastic measures to regain control. Observer Kelvin informed Alex that the Council was considering terminating the simulation and declaring the results inconclusive, which would result in both species facing penalties rather than a clear victor. But Alex had learned something else from monitoring the communication networks. The consciousnesses uploaded into the simulation could not be safely extracted while the virtual environment was running at full capacity. Terminating the simulation abruptly would risk permanent damage to the minds of everyone inside, potentially killing thousands of real people to cover up the Council's deception. That night, Alex made a decision that would change the course of galactic history. Instead of trying to help the Titans win the simulation, Alex began working to expose the entire system to the galaxy. Using the communication networks that connected Omega-7 to the rest of galactic civilization, Alex started transmitting evidence of what the simulations really were. The response was immediate and explosive. Species across the galaxy that had lost previous simulations began demanding explanations. Civilizations that had accepted territorial concessions and economic penalties as the cost of peaceful conflict resolution realized they had been victims of an elaborate deception. Alex's revelation sparked the first galaxy-wide crisis the Council had faced in over 1,000 years. But their response would prove that they were willing to go to any length to protect their system of control, even if it meant abandoning all pretense of peaceful resolution and returning to the open warfare they claimed to have eliminated. Emergency alarms began sounding throughout Omega-7 at exactly Aero 300 station time. Alex was awakened by the harsh wailing sirens and flashing red lights that filled the observation chamber. Through the translation interface, Alex could hear panicked communications in dozens of languages as council representatives tried to understand what was happening. The evidence Alex had transmitted across the Galactic Communication Network was spreading faster than the council could contain it. Archived records of previous simulations were being analyzed by independent experts who confirmed that the outcomes had been manipulated to favor council member species. Testimonies from surviving participants revealed that they had been deceived about the true nature of their involvement. Overseer Thandros appeared on the central communication screen, his shifting features locked into an expression of cold authority. His voice carried across all observation platforms simultaneously, translated into every language represented in the chamber. The simulation was being suspended due to technical difficulties, he announced. All participants would be extracted, immediately, and the dispute would be resolved through traditional diplomatic channels. Alex knew this was a lie. The extraction process would allow the council to erase evidence of their manipulation while claiming that any deaths were the result of simulation malfunctions rather than deliberate termination. Thousands of uploaded consciousnesses would be sacrificed to protect the council's secret. But when the extraction process began, something unexpected happened. The simulation refused to shut down cleanly. The virtual environment had become too complex, with too many variables and adaptive behaviors that the original programming could not account for. Alex's introduction of human unpredictability had created a cascade of changes that made the system resistant to external control. Observer Kelvin rushed to Alex's platform, his silver skin patterns flickering with what looked like desperation. He explained that the council's technicians could not safely extract the participants without corrupting the entire simulation matrix. The consciousness of everyone inside was somehow entangled with the virtual environment in ways that defied their understanding. Alex realized that their interference had done more than just change the tactical situation. Human creativity and adaptability had infected the simulation like a virus, spreading new ways of thinking throughout the entire system. The uploaded minds of both Titan and Quartzling participants had learned to think in ways their species had never explored before, making them incompatible with the Council's rigid extraction protocols. The Council's response was swift and brutal. Within hours of the failed extraction attempt, massive fleets began arriving at Omega-7 from all 12 member civilizations. Alex could see them through the station's viewports, warships bristling with weapons that had not been used in actual combat for centuries, but which had been maintained and upgraded throughout the long peace of simulated warfare. Thandros made another announcement, this time dropping all pretense of diplomatic language. The simulation had become corrupted by external interference, he declared. To prevent the spread of this corruption to other systems, Omega-7 would be quarantined and eventually destroyed. All witnesses to the malfunction would be relocated to secure facilities for their own protection. Alex understood what this meant. The Council was preparing to eliminate everyone who had learned the truth about their system, including all the observers from dozens of different species. They would claim it was a tragic accident caused by simulation technology pushed beyond its safe limits, and use the incident to justify even stricter controls on future conflicts. But the galaxy-wide reaction to Alex's revelations had grown beyond what the Council could suppress through force alone. Species that had suffered under the consequences of rigged simulations were demanding justice. Trade routes were being blocked, diplomatic relations were breaking down, and several civilizations were openly preparing for war against Council forces. The situation became even more complex when Admiral Narration established communication with Alex from inside the failing simulation. The Titan commander had realized that his consciousness was trapped in a virtual environment, but rather than panic, he had begun organizing all the uploaded participants into a unified resistance movement. The Titans and Quartzlings, who had been enemies just days before, were now working together to survive the Council's attempt to delete them. They had learned human concepts of cooperation across former enemy lines, using shared adversity to build alliances that transcended their original conflict. Alex discovered that the simulation's communication networks were still connected to the outside galaxy, which meant the trapped consciousnesses could potentially coordinate with physical forces in the real universe. The uploaded minds had access to detailed intelligence about Council operations, including fleet positions, defensive capabilities, and strategic vulnerabilities. Working with Admiral Narration and Quartzling Commander Zareth, Alex began developing a plan that was ambitious beyond anything their species had ever attempted. Instead of trying to escape from the simulation, they would use it as a command center to coordinate resistance against the Council throughout the galaxy. The plan required Alex to do something that violated every principle of non-interference that human diplomats had been taught. They would have to become active participants in galactic warfare, using human military knowledge to help other species fight for their freedom from Council control. The first step was establishing secure communication with Earth and the few other independent civilizations that had not yet been absorbed into the Council's sphere of influence. Alex used their knowledge of human encryption methods to create communication protocols that the Council's monitoring systems could not easily decrypt. The response from Earth was immediate and overwhelming. Humanity's military leaders had been preparing for the possibility of galactic conflict ever since achieving faster-than-light travel. They understood that their independence would eventually bring them into conflict with established powers, and they had been developing strategies specifically designed to fight technologically superior enemies. Within 48 hours, human fleets were moving toward strategic positions throughout the galaxy. They carried weapons and tactics that the Council had never encountered, because humanity had never participated in the simulated warfare that formed the basis of the Council's military planning. Alex realized that their intervention in a single simulation had triggered something much larger than a local conflict. The rigid system of control that had maintained galactic peace for 1,000 years was collapsing, and the war that followed would determine whether the galaxy's civilizations would be ruled by deception or governed by genuine cooperation. The final phase of the plan required Alex to do something that might be impossible: find a way to transfer consciousness from the simulation back into physical bodies while maintaining the tactical advantages of the virtual environment. It was a challenge that would test every aspect of human creativity and determination, with the fate of entire civilizations hanging in the balance. The breakthrough came when Alex realized that the simulation was not actually separate from reality, but rather a parallel layer of existence that could influence physical events through quantum entanglement. The Council had built their virtual environments using technology that connected directly to the fundamental forces of the universe, allowing simulated actions to have real consequences through mechanisms they did not fully understand. Working with the combined scientific knowledge of dozens of species trapped in the simulation, Alex began developing what they called reality bridges, pathways that would allow consciousness and information to flow between the virtual and physical realms. The process was dangerous and untested, but it offered the only hope of escape for the thousands of uploaded minds facing deletion. Admiral Narration and Commander Zareth had been busy organizing their forces for the most complex military operation in galactic history. The plan required perfect coordination between simulated forces inside the virtual environment and physical fleets operating in real space. Every timing had to be precise, because they would only get one chance before the Council destroyed Omega-7, and everything connected to it. The first reality bridge opened during a coordinated attack on a Council monitoring station in the Vega system. Titan tactical data from the simulation was transmitted directly to human ships in physical space, allowing Earth forces to execute maneuvers with precision that seemed impossible to their enemies. The Council fleet defending the station was completely unprepared for tactics that combined Titan defensive strategies with human unpredictability. Alex watched through multiple viewpoints as the battle unfolded simultaneously in simulation and reality. Quartzling light-based weapons were being replicated by human ships using modified laser arrays, while Tidan engineering techniques allowed for rapid field repairs that kept damaged vessels in the fight long after they should have been destroyed. The psychological impact was as important as the tactical success. Council forces had not faced genuine opposition in centuries, and they were psychologically unprepared for enemies who fought with creativity and adaptation rather than following predictable patterns. Human concepts like improvisation and lateral thinking spread through the resistance forces like wildfire, making them increasingly difficult to counter. The Council's response was to accelerate their timeline for destroying Omega-7. Thandros announced that the station would be eliminated within 24 hours to prevent the simulation corruption from spreading to other systems. But this deadline actually worked in Alex's favor, because it forced the Council to concentrate their forces in one location where they could be attacked effectively. The final battle began when human fleets arrived in the Omega-7 system, supported by rebel forces from every species that had suffered under Council rule. The sight was extraordinary. Hundreds of different ship designs working together using tactics that had been developed by uploaded consciousnesses and transmitted through reality bridges. Alex coordinated the assault from within the simulation, using their unique position to provide real-time intelligence to forces in physical space. The virtual environment had become a command center that allowed for instantaneous communication across vast distances, giving the Resistance a crucial advantage over Council forces that relied on traditional faster-than-light communication methods. The battle was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Council weapons that had been designed to fight conventional enemies proved ineffective against tactics that combined the best elements of dozens of different military traditions. Human hit-and-run strategies were executed by Titan ships with Quartzling weapons, while Earth vessels used defensive formations based on species that the Council had subjugated centuries ago. The most crucial moment came when Alex realized that the reality bridges could be used for more than just communication and coordination. Working with the simulation's quantum processors, they found a way to transfer entire consciousness patterns from virtual to physical bodies, effectively allowing the uploaded minds to return to reality while maintaining their enhanced tactical knowledge. The mass extraction began as Council forces closed in on Omega-7. Thousands of uploaded consciousnesses streamed through the reality bridges, returning to their physical bodies with new understanding of cooperation and creative thinking. Admiral Narration materialized on his flagship with tactical knowledge that combined Titan tradition with human innovation. Commander Zereth appeared on her command ship with strategies that no Quartzling had ever conceived. But Alex chose to remain in the simulation, realizing that someone needed to maintain the reality bridges and coordinate the final phase of the operation. From the virtual environment, Alex could see the entire galaxy as a single tactical situation, identifying weak points in Council defenses and opportunities for the Resistance forces. The tide of battle turned decisively when Alex coordinated. Simultaneous attacks on 12 different Council strongholds across the galaxy. The attacks were executed with precision that seemed supernatural to observers, because they were planned by a mind that could process information from hundreds of different sources simultaneously and adapt to changing conditions faster than any biological intelligence. Thandros made one final attempt to destroy the simulation and eliminate Alex along with it. But the virtual environment had become too integrated with galactic communication networks to be safely shut down. Destroying the simulation would have disrupted faster-than-light communication throughout the galaxy, potentially causing more damage to Council forces than to the Resistance. The war ended not with a single decisive battle, but with the gradual collapse of the Council's authority as species after species declared independence and began governing themselves according to principles of cooperation rather than domination. The reality bridges became permanent fixtures of galactic infrastructure, allowing for unprecedented levels of communication and coordination between different civilizations. Alex eventually returned to physical form, but was forever changed by the experience of existing as pure consciousness in a virtual environment. They had learned that the boundaries between simulation and reality were far more flexible than anyone had imagined, and that the most powerful weapon against tyranny was the simple human refusal to accept that things had to remain the way they were. The galaxy that emerged from the conflict was chaotic and sometimes difficult, but it was also free. Species that had been enemies for generations learned to work together, sharing knowledge and resources in ways that the Council's rigid hierarchy had never allowed. Conflicts still arose, but they were resolved through genuine negotiation rather than manipulated simulations. Earth became the center of the new galactic community, not because humans were superior to other species, but because human unpredictability and creativity had proven to be the catalyst that allowed all civilizations to break free from the limitations imposed by thousands of years of controlled conflict. Alex returned to teaching, but now their students included beings from dozens of different worlds, all eager to learn about the human concepts of adaptation and creative thinking that had reshaped galactic civilization. The war that followed a single human observer entering. A simulation had indeed been real, and its consequences would echo throughout the galaxy for generations to come.